All right, so here in Shaman, now this is an interesting card, Charged Hammer. With it's a 4-cost 2/4 weapon with Death Rattle. Your hero power becomes deal 2 damage, and this is like, I don't know. It's hard for me to evaluate this because the upfront effect of this, which is a 4-cost 2-power weapon, like this is a high cost to get to actually changing your hero power, and most of the time, the Shaman hero power is quite good. Because you generally build your deck such that you're looking to leverage small minions and totems and things to actually win the game, with things like Flame Tongue Totem, with things like Defender Vargas, with many of the new totem cards. And if you're playing an aggressive version of Shaman, you're generally not going to want a 4-turn window off of something like this before you actually get to utilize the Death Rattle effect of it. It is important to note that you can actually just replace your Charged Hammer, or if your opponent plays something that kills it, you do get the Death Rattle effect. But that's just still a big investment. If you spend your 4 mana, play Charged Hammer, hit with it, next turn replace it with Doom Hammer, you've now just spent a ton of mana to get to hero power is 2 damage. So it's definitely an interesting card, but the upfront investment before you get anything out of it is very, very high, and the time cost is also very high. If you don't do something like replace it or like have your opponent kill it. But I can definitely see this being a card that I am interested in experimenting with. I don't have a ton of faith that it will be a particularly competitive card, but I do think that it's interesting and something that I want to experiment with. Thunder Bluff Valiant. So this is a really interesting card. Inspire, give your totems +2 attack. I assume that this works with the totem that you actually create. I'm not really sure. It makes sense that it would. Otherwise, it's just a really awkward thing where it's like, aha, I'll make a totem and all my other totems are good. But I mean, this is a 3/6 body for 5, which is like not amazing. It is likely to survive an on curve minion because few 5-drops actually have 6 power. And I like the fact that this set is giving Shaman more things to do with their totems, because that's really the defining thing about Shaman is defining the characteristics of Shaman is like, okay, my hero power does this thing, and I can generally create a board full of stuff. And while much like Paladin, that can be somewhat problematic in terms of the way it matches up in certain situations, like against Frothing Berserker, Whirlwinds, and whatever else, it can be a liability. Giving Shaman more ways to leverage that sort of characteristic of the class, rather than just basically being Flame Tongue Totem is why your totems are good. Like, you have a card, more or less. There's a lot more ways to leverage your totems. This one, I don't know how good it is. It basically is like a Quartermaster in that you want to play it on 7 mana. You don't really want to play it on 5 mana, but Quartermaster you can play on 5 mana. But the fact that this is also repeatable, if your opponent doesn't kill your Valiant, you can just activate it again and get even more power. So it's a pretty cool effect. I like the flexibility it gives to sort of a mid-range style of Shaman deck to get more value out of the totems sort of in the mid to late game. Previously, I mean, there have been a variety of things that Shaman decks have typically played in the 5-drop slot. Usually things like Azure Drake, Sludge Belcher, and Anti-Keelbot. And this is a more sort of focused one of any of those. I am sort of concerned that a deck that would want to use this is competing with a lot of just the very good things in that slot, because Azure Drake makes your Lightning Storms better. Sludge Belcher is just kind of super important to just stay alive in a lot of matchups. But I like that there are cards like this that sort of explore that dynamic more. So whether this will see play, I don't know. If there is a mid-range Shaman deck that is good, I expect this to be a card that at least sees some amount of action in it. But as to whether mid-range Shaman decks are going to be viable in competitive play remains to be seen. Draenei Totemcarver. It's a 4/4/4 with Battlecry, gain +1/+1 for each friendly totem. And this is also a cool card because a 4/4/4, not a good card. Basically, this is understated initially, but if you have a single totem, you're getting a better deal on this than you get on the average 4-drop. Shaman has been a class that actually has previously didn't have great 4-drop options. Fireguard Destroyer out of Blackrock Mountain kind of changed that. Fireguard Destroyer is an excellent card. But this, I think, is another option for decks that are looking to potentially focus on totem synergies. I like the fact that this is, another way to leverage things like that. And one of the things that's also awesome is that this actually counts any totem. It's not just your totems that are created by your hero power. So if you do play you can actually play like Flame Tongue or Mana Tide or things like that, and buff this. So I mean, if you're able to play this as like a say 5/5 or 6/6 for 4, it's like that's a very powerful card. As to whether it's generally going to be better than even just something like Piloted Shredder, that's actually one of the biggest problems I think with evaluating a lot of minions, is that Piloted Shredder is just so good that it is hard for a minion at 4 cost to be better than it, because it offers both a lot of stats for its cost. It's a 4/3 to start with, and then the death rattle is on average like a 2/2. So not only is it giving you a lot of stats for its cost, but it's also resilient to removal effects, whereas obviously something like this would not be. If you are able to consistently get multiple totems into play, though, and this is able to be like a 6/6, the fact that that is big enough to survive even a death spite hit with the death rattle effect is actually a pretty big deal. So I do think that that this is a card that, again, if there are sort of these totem-focused Shaman decks, may very well see play. The problem is anything lining up against Piloted Shredder is really stiff competition. Tuskarr Totemic, 3/2 Battlecry, summon any random totem. This is kind of interesting because there are a lot of actually pretty high value totems. Like if this guy summons Mana Tide, that's super powerful. If this guy summons a wide variety of things. Flame Tongue can be super powerful, but this is also just a relatively low statted guy, like a 3-cost 2 health minion. That is so weak to opposing minions. Like if your opponent just has a 2/1 in play, it trades with your 3/2. You trade with your 3-drop, which is pretty bad. So. I don't know if this is a card that really will be particularly viable, but it is obviously a card that is exciting in a totem-focused deck that is looking to have as many totems in play as possible. And it's the Piloted Shredder of Shaman cards here. Shaman has tons of random effects, which is good and bad. It can definitely create interesting gameplay. But having so many of the mechanics of the class end up being random from the hero power on up can definitely be frustrating for competitive players, and can definitely create scenarios where you can't really plan. So I don't really know how popular this will be for that reason. But if you are playing a totem-focused deck, or just a deck that's looking to establish a large board presence, maybe it's good. Again, kind of similar to what I was saying about the totem things before, as well as the Paladin hero power. The effectiveness of decks that are looking to build a big board may very well be quite dependent on how popular Patron Warrior and how effective Patron Warrior is after the new set is released, if there are any changes to it, things like that. I do think this card has a lot of potential. I'll have to play with it before I get a good sense of it. It is, you do get two bodies immediately for one card. And if you do get a high-value totem, that's very strong. But the fact that it just dies to most played 1-drops is pretty discouraging in terms of how effective it can be in a lot of matchups. But if you do get this guy, off of your Tuskarr Totemic, well, you are in really good shape. So yeah, Overload 1 for a 2-cost 3/4. This is a really good card, I think. A lot of the problem that many Shaman decks have is their reliance on early game spells in many cases to combat opposing stuff. If you fall behind an opposing creature deck, in particular when you are forced to use spells that have overload to actually kill your opponent's minions, that can be a big problem. But if you're actually able to play a minion that contests like multiple minions on or even up curve, that's very powerful. Totem Golem can kill multiple 1-drops. It can kill a 2-drop and a 1-drop. It can kill even, in many cases, a 2-drop and a 3-drop. It effectively costs you 3 mana, but it's actually costing you 2 and then 1 the next turn is actually great for the way that Shaman mana curves often work, because you often want to play a 2 or play, you know, a totem or whatever, and then play another thing on 3. If you play a Totem Golem on 2, you can still easily hero power for another totem on 3. And that's a great use of your mana in a lot of cases. Like, you don't necessarily often want to go 2 into 3, because many of the 3s in Shaman actually have overload anyway. So you force yourself off of being able to hit your 4. So playing like Totem Golem into hero power, into the 4-cost totem buff girl or whatever, I forget the name of the card, but like, because Totem Golem is often able to contest opposing things and even live, you can have a totally reasonable way to actually just play that as a 6/6 in turn 4, which can be quite powerful. So I definitely think this is a card that will see competitive play in a lot. I mean, I can even see this being played in like an aggressive Shaman deck, because it's just such a big body for so cheap. So yeah, definitely a strong card. Definitely the best thing you can get off of Tuskarr Totemic, as far as immediate board presence and value is concerned. So we'll certainly see play. Very powerful. Definitely fills what I think is a hole, generally speaking, in Shaman's early game. Ancestral Knowledge. This card, I think, this is WoW TCG artwork. I forget what WoW TCG artwork it was. This is one of the cards that I actually designed for WoW TCG years ago. But anyway, I don't think this card is good. Overload 2, draw 2 cards. Like, this is maybe a card that you could play in some sort of combo Shaman deck, like in the late game, to set up, you know, something. It is true that Shamans typically have some difficulty with actually keeping up in card economy, because there aren't that many card draw cards in Shaman. There's basically Mana Tide Totem, which you frequently need to protect in order to get significant value out of it. This does let you potentially like draw into combo pieces, which is why I think that maybe this is a sort of card that is strong in a deck like, you know, Ancestral Ancestor's Call or whatever else. But Overload 2 for this effect is a really steep cost. You know, you're basically getting an Arcane Intellect for 1 less, and you're paying a lot for it. You know, the Overload 2 is just such a huge cost that it seems like it is going to be difficult for an average deck to leverage this. Like, one of the things about Overload, and this particularly costly here, because when you're playing with Overload, you're paying less now to get more later, or you know, you're paying a lower cost now to get a higher impact effect immediately, at the cost of being able to do less later. And what you're doing now is draw 2 cards. You're not getting any immediate impact, any immediate game impact off of that card. So if you say Ancestral Knowledge in like turn 5 of a game, you have literally had no impact on the immediate board, and then your next turn you're able to do less. And that's just a huge drawback. Like, maybe this is a reasonable card in a deck like, it's just trying to burn your opponent out. You know, I'm saying like a combo deck in terms of Ancestor's Call Shaman or something like that. But like, if your deck is just a bunch of Overload burn spells, and you get like some sort of spell power thing in play, yeah, maybe this is a powerful card because it lets you dig for the cards for the burn spells to kill your opponent right now. But that, I think, is the only place that this really has a role. It's a card that will see niche play, I think, in decks that are looking to close out the game immediately. It will not be an effective card in mid-range Shaman style of decks because of the very high cost.